Good morning and welcome to our Black News. I'm Don Allen, joined again by Anthony Scott in his palatial estate in South Minneapolis, not too far from where? George Floyd
George Floyd
Square.
Square. George
Yes,
Floyd
yes.
Square, yeah. Yeah, right now the estate is covered in snow right now. It's
Yeah.
I've gone out there several times. I think Don, you mentioned that earlier in the production meeting about having to do multiple. As soon as you get the snow done and come back and open up the window, there's more, and there's
Yes,
more.
yes. I'm pretty much done with shoveling snow, but I do have to go out and do it again right after the show because, the wife has to go shopping and does not want to step in any snow. And it's just, happy wife, happy life. And I don't mind that today anyway. So we have a good show today. We have waiting in the wings, former state representative from Minnesota, Raymond Dean, affectionately known as, with my term of endearment, the people's mayor, on standby, and also Minnesota Senator re-elect, the incumbent, Republican Mark Coran, and friend of the show. He's been here a bunch of times, and we're going to talk
Yeah.
about the Minnesota 17 billion surplus. That's dollars. So I don't know if there's like gold in Fort Knox, or if there's silver, or there's cash sitting in the basement of the state capitol that we could get a crew together and make a movie and go down there and get it, and go live in Bolivia for the rest of our lives or whatever.
Well, I'd like to know the secret of how they continue to accumulate such enormous sums of money. I mean,
Yeah,
what's the strategy on having a surplus? I mean, it's continued surplus that just keeps growing and growing. I mean, what are they going out to Mystic Lake somewhere and they're just putting it all on the wheel of fortune? How is this happening, Dan? So maybe we can give us some explanations of that.
yeah. We have to talk about that. We have to talk about education coming up here later on in the show with these guys. And I just heard I was part of a think tank of six people, and we sat for 4 hours and talked about solutions for Minneapolis and St. Paul public schools. And one of the things that everyone came to after this kind of survey group was maybe if we cut them in half. Having over 50 schools to govern in both cities, it might be too much for the current infrastructure, and it might be heavy in places where it should not be heavy. And the outcomes should be on behalf of the families and the students to make sure there's a route from high school to 12 to 16 and then into career. And that trajectory we know have been thrown off for a very long time in the Twin Cities, in spite of, since 2019, $600 million a year and this was June 2nd, 2019, Star and Tribune, $600 million a year, yet achievement gap persists. And that was kind of a look right into Twin Cities school districts. I'm not saying that other school districts around Twin Cities have issues. They might or might not, but I know they're doing a hell of a lot better. So, Anthony, you went to a meeting about George Floyd Square before we bring our guest. Can you run that down and so we can understand what's going on?
Well, just quickly, they've been having a series of community meetings, and I've gone to the last 2 or 3, and I think they canceled the one for, I think there was supposed to be one this month. There's not going to be another one till the spring. But what their concept is, first of all, they're going to buy the gas station. Supposedly, the city of Minneapolis is already cutting a deal to buy that. But what they want to do is name the area the George Perry Floyd Center for Peace and Justice. And so it has some prototypes. I wish I could show these, Dan, that it has something that actually looks like George Floyd's prone body. I mean, a replica that's in the middle of this Floyd Square. And then they have a box with the big fist, that you see on Chicago Avenue there. And first of all, I didn't know Mr. Floyd's middle name. I didn't know we had the name of Perry. But it never talks about what they're going to do with Cup Foods. That seems to be pretty much untouchable. They still haven't opened up the streets. They still haven't rerouted the buses through that area. But they really want to put this, there was an architect there at the last meeting that has this George Floyd. I don't know if you can see this at all. I'll try to, but this is the concept of the George Floyd Center for Peace and Justice.
And
And
racial healing.
and it just, my personal feeling is, why do we have to keep being reminded of this? I mean, isn't there other ways that we can move on from this, but to keep being reminded?
Yeah.
I mean, the family's been compensated, the police are in jail. Let's fix this thing and let's move on. But it just seems like for some reason people are benefiting, I think, by this, and it just can't get off the dime.
Yeah, it's really rough right now because the big push around the woke neighborhood and quickly, because we want to get to our guests. I think, this is my opinion, don't think like me, but at least think, I'm looking at this contingency of woke folks that are feeling some kind of guilt and doing things, trigger reaction and pandering that don't make any sense, really. And I don't see the economic stimulus coming from making that a racial justice center or there's the NAACP, there's the Minneapolis Urban League, there's Sabathani Community Center led by Scott Redd, who's a staunch advocate for social justice in Minneapolis and St. Paul. Okay, so you have these established places that are there. Let's put the resources there. Let's give Speedway back their gas station, because if you know anything about business, you're gonna have to figure in the gas they lost since 2020, and the price of the building. Because Speedway, I don't think they're idiots. They're not just gonna give them that and say kumbaya, more peace and racial justice. They're gonna want money, hard dollars. But anyway, that's a whole nother mess that we can get into. And I don't want to hold up our guests here, but this morning I'm gonna bring on former state representative Raymond Dean, Minnesota state rep, and Senator Mark Curran, friend of the show. We have select pictures from Senator Curran out catching that huge fish.
The fish, there it is. There is the fish.
Yeah. That monster, I would I don't know if I'd even pull it out of the water, but it was huge. Yes. Hey, welcome to both of you. How's everyone doing? Let's start. The People's Mayor, Mr. Dean. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Good morning, Don. Good morning, Anthony. It's good to be on the show.
Yeah, appreciate it. Senator Curran, welcome. How are you?
Good morning, everyone.
Okay. Well, we want to get into this $17 billion surplus.
And, projected surplus.
Okay, thank you. I never see the word projected, but I don't.
But break that down. What does that mean, projected? I mean, I've got a projected Social Security check that will be coming, but so what is projected funds?
The November forecast that comes out is a projected forecast, and in February it'll be the actual surplus.
Okay. All right. So in February, you're saying, so that 17 billion, that's not, from my little knowledge about money, because I'm not really making any, that's not gold somewhere that is it's insured, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Is that just paperwork, or is it real cold hard cash?
It's an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh.
So it could be more. So it could even be more, right? Could even be more.
Could be more. It could be, yes.
It could be more. Could be less. Yeah.
But in that, when they go through the forecast, right? They're looking at all the revenues, trends, in business and incomes and those things, and trying to forecast the future. The one thing that forecast and the surplus is actually in excess of the annual planned growth of government. So that's just in the excess. So there's a baked in cost of government that continues to grow. That's in excess of that, of what they plan to, which will come in revenues. Just like a cut in government, many times, rarely has there ever been a cut. A reduction in spending is, in the definition of what you see, is always defined as a cut. Okay. And so remember that there's a baked in growth, and it's somewhere, Ray, between 4 and 6% on an annual basis. So for a biennium, that means there's an excess of minimum 6% compound, much greater than that when you compound it annually. And those revenues are in excess of that. So if you took the base budget of $52 billion for the general fund, remember, only a small portion or less than half of our total spending. you would look at the annual increases would be far greater, or the collections will be far greater than the 17 billion, just because of the baked in growth if you did year over year like you do on your budget, Don and Anthony.
And Senator and Don and Anthony, the thing that Minnesota does not do that many other states do with their budgets is inflation. We don't account for inflation in the projected surplus. So you could look at that 17 billion and probably say with inflation, maybe it might be closer to 14 or 15 billion.
But again, when we're looking at these kind of numbers, it would say to me that there isn't any reason that we continue to be one of the 12, 13 states that taxes seniors Social Security and pensions. When you look at these big numbers, how do you continue to justify being one? I don't know how the other states are doing. Maybe the other states are doing so well that maybe this is a small, maybe this is very small pittance. I don't know. But when you look at those numbers, to not tax the seniors would seem to be a great thing for the state.
Anthony, so along with that, in 2017, I think, Ray, you were there, the 2017, I think the total cost or the total paid by senior citizens for taxation on a biennium is about $460 million, 470. That's a lot of money. That's real money coming out of your pocket. We cut that in half. So it's about $230 million, I think, in 2017. And so depending on where you fall in the income scale, I think it's like between $75,000, $78,000 in annual income. Your Social Security was not taxed in Minnesota. Sadly, nobody knows that. And then we put in, I think 2019, another $30 million or something. So almost $300 million we put back into senior citizens' hands. Today, with today's dollars, that is about, I think it's forecasted around $500 million. That half morphed into $500 million is being extracted from our senior citizens because of the taxation on Social Security. Now, both Governor Walz and Dayton, in their initial plans, wanted to take that back. So we'll see if that. We'll see. Since the campaign season was, hey, we're gonna take care of our seniors. We hope that's true.
Yeah, and I was reading something the other day where it's speculated that Governor Walz might be flip-flopping on that. And so, I mean, we're objective here and we like everybody because we know they're all nice people. So we'll see. We'll just keep an eye on that because that was one of the campaign talking points, and that'd be very interesting. So in January, Senator Coran, you have a lot of people knocking at the doors of the state capitol and the Senate office building, and I might be there too. So I'm just not throwing any rocks in my glass house, but asking for things that maybe will not move the needle because of the talent of the person asking for the thing, but continue to get funded. But that's a whole different show. I mean, how will we be able to sort this out? Because when people hear that there's 17 billion, whatever, they, including me, you think that there's like some money to be used to start a school district, to do another nonprofit, or continue to fail something that has failed yearly, but there's a nice gala every December in the holiday where they raise, $30. And I mean, when does that end? I mean, what's that process look like?
Well, the whole process. Remember, now you'll be stopping at the third floor because the majority occupies the third floor. We're now the minority, so we will be a secondary conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll be a secondary conversation. But when you look out there, what the priorities are, and it looks like a big pot of money, and what type of spending occurs. Whether it be a return. There's certainly a goal that would be return it to the citizens. They have a real need with the inflationary times we have. Return it. Spending on critical need. What is that? And that's going to be everybody's going to be there because every priority Ray and I have ever seen is a number one priority, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
For me, when you look at things that likely need to increase, because remember, we can't afford to increase under this inflationary times permanent long-term spending, but we always looked at nursing home, the one critical need, nursing homes, group homes, and PCAs. if you look at a real structural deficit and a collapse of an industry, that is one of them. So we tried to put $1 billion in the last go round just to try and stop the losses. And it affects every single person here, no matter what your age is. People think, oh, that's just our senior citizens. Well, nursing homes are closing at a pace we've never seen. And what it affects is everybody who has a desire to have an elective surgery or things, it's part of a critical care network that you will then migrate to for certain procedures, which you need transition care. So the hospitals are backed up. So you can't get access to the care you need, the critical care. It has a really profound impact. And it's one of those areas where they've lost 20,000 people just in that industry alone. And they're not coming back from what we can tell. So some long-term permanent wage increases, those things are there. And then for me, like the rest of the government, is the rules are more compounding in a negative manner than just the pure lack of money. So that's one area. So that's what we have to be aware of.
Mark, Senator, pardon me, Senator.
Mark's okay to Anthony. Yeah. Or I'm sorry, Ray.
I would add childcare too. Childcare is in a crisis, not just in Minnesota, all over this country. And I think that when you look at Minnesota workforce and the needs of families for caring for children, I think that there is an opportunity to do something relative to that. Mark's right. Part of this is looking at what is one-time funding. If we look at ongoing funding, that then begins to create a possible issues out in the future. And, we didn't just get here overnight because all of a sudden one day somebody decided, well, let's make our structure in our state so that we're going to have a huge surplus. Back when Governor Ventura was in office, there was $2 billion surplus in the reserves. And he decided to give 3/4 of it back to everybody in the state of Minnesota, which brought our reserves down to $500 million.
That wasn't bad.
No, it wasn't bad. But then the economy went south.
Yeah.
And Plenty came in office. And all of a sudden we had to cut a lot of stuff because the revenues weren't matching the cost of government. And so we did that. And, were you there, Mark, in 2014 when we did
I came in 16.
So we were messing with schools with the state budget. We were taking the money that was supposed to go to schools and we were delaying the payment for 6 months because that's how we were able to balance the budget. So we finally paid back what was called the school shift. Plenty handed Governor Dayton a $4 billion deficit.
Interesting. So when you,
so budgets are going to go up, budgets are going to go down. The economy is going to go up. The economy is going to go down. And sometimes those things, end up happily together. And I think that that's where we're at right now with the $17 billion projected surplus.
Okay. When you said you guys withheld the money or delayed it for 6 months, were you able to collect? Is that some kind of interest building? Why hold it? I don't understand. Why hold it for 6 months and then give it to them? What was the benefit? I guess I'm trying to find out.
Technically, we didn't have the money in the state coffers. And so in essence, what school districts had to do is they had to go into their reserves to cover what would have been payments to them from the state.
Wow. Okay.
Now contrast that, Don and Ray. You mentioned a couple things around the child care, which, by the way, my wife got kicked out of the healthcare, so she now runs a child care. But the delay in school, the shift in funding, right? The timing of that funding. A couple things we did in 2000. Oh, I'm sorry. It was 1991 when the state had a shortfall in cash flow. They just decided that all businesses should forecast their taxes on sales tax and certain other taxes, and then pay them ahead of time because the state had a short-term cash flow, and so you get to do that. And then just a little another tidbit when we talk about the things that are affecting nursing homes. Nursing homes don't get paid for their services for 21 months after they deliver. 21 months. And when you think about the cost of dollars and the impact of that, floating that debt for 21 months on services rendered, 21 months ago is crippling to them. So there's a whole bunch of those types of things that when you really dig down, gets you more frustrated than you've ever been as an average citizen when you get to the cap.
But is that something new? This 21%,
21 months.
21 months. I mean, is that something that's has been throughout the industry, and because of staffing and because of levels of needs of clientele that they have? I mean, how does that?
I'm not sure when that structurally came around. Ray, do you know when that structure changed?
No,
probably for the same reasons we just talked about the school, right? Probably for the same reasons we just talked about the schools, in some federal program, that required that modification because of a short-term cash flow. But now when you look at it, when they're at 90%, 100% occupancy and you're fully staffed, you can revenue. And so it was baked into the model. Many of them today are not even at 70% capacity. Many are closing and many are at 50% capacity. And so the compounding effect of the loss of all of that infrastructure it means floating that debt for 21 months is even more devastating today than it was in the past. So,
yeah, and
the thing we've got to remember about this $17 billion, I mean, some of this money is actually one-time money from the federal government related to the pandemic. So it's not like 2 years from now, that money's going to be coming from the feds. It's like, we've got to figure our shit out too.
Yeah. Ray brings up a good point. And I think Don and Anthony, we talked about it before, but our conversation is only about general fund spending. Remember to me, it's a dialogue to keep most uninformed. Yeah, general fund is only the portion which the legislature appropriates. So it typically reflects less than half of our total spending. So our biennium spending is in excess of $100 billion for a biennium. And then along with that, probably the question we didn't spend much on the front side, where the heck did this 17 come from? The cumulative effect of kind of this high inflationary period. But when you look at $80 billion from the COVID relief, you name it, dozens and dozens of different ways. $80 billion was also pumped into Minnesota from our federal government over that same period of time. So over a biennium, $80 billion. Don, St. Paul, Minneapolis schools, right? Schools alone got $3 billion in addition to their funding already. And so all of that adds up into increased purchasing, right? Increased wages, jobs, revenue, all of those things. And that probably drives what Ray just talked about. This is a one-time large blip in a cumulative effect. There's some natural growth, right? There's some in there, but you pile in $80 billion, they're still just trying to figure out how to spend that money. There's still a lot of it unspent. Yeah. And so we're gradually going to move into a revenue stream that reflects the real economy. And it's going to be pretty difficult in the next couple of years when that money's gone. And the worst part about it is that money was distributed to every city, county, township, and state government. And so every dollar that you spend has a tail to it, meaning an additional ongoing annual cost. And so we're probably going to see the largest increase in government spending at every single level of government. And you're going to start to see it even more so reflected in your property tax statement, and everywhere you go. It's going to be a pretty dramatic increase because they raised the base cost of services from this point forward. And so we need to make sure we don't do that at a state level and structurally have the compounding effect that's going to be devastating in the next 4 to 5 years, because that's when that impact will start to be known.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for this conversation because I know as a resident of St. Paul, our property taxes just got raised. And there weren't conversations that I thought were salient in the community. And the conversations that did happen, happened at 11, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, when people that have property or owners are at work. And so it made it difficult to see this trajectory of we're thinking about it and a couple of weeks later or whatever, it's done. And like, oh my God, we didn't get a chance to chime in, or why you don't think as a citizen of a city or Minneapolis, St. Paul, or wherever, that it's so hard for them to reach out with you with information and actually have this conversation, because I'm under the auspices that there are other ways to address this. Even like you gave me a bell ringer there, Senator Coran, when you talked about the healthcare facilities waiting 21 months for funding or money, and it's like, how can you do business like that? How can you really take care of your senior citizens and the people you need to take care of? Or the transition folks, if you're waiting? That means someone that has to have really deep pockets to wait that long every time you bill something, or it just doesn't make any sense. And so there has to be there is a right way to do it, but why do it and you don't have to answer this, but because it's another show probably. Why do it like that and kill the economic development or the flow or the sustainability for a critical infrastructure that we need, especially in Minnesota as we move to 2023. I just want to put this up because it's relevant. These are by 2032, not too far away, Minnesota will be a majority of color state. People under 60. Next year, people 30 and under are going to be the majority of this state of Minnesota. This is the YMCA Equity Innovation Center. I'm a member of the YMCA, but I like their research. Incredible of the stuff they put together when you're talking about demographics, because YMCA has served a niche community for years, the rich to the people that might not be rich, and they've treated them the same way. And that data right there is just really impeccable, but it just shows that there's a need at the state level to correct a lot of that silliness, is what I'll call it. And I don't mean to offend anybody that's listening that might work for someone, because you guys are nice people, of those delays and these different processes, like even for the school funding. You said what, 80 million into the schools, or you named an amount, Senator Coran, that even
$80 billion was put into Minnesota, $3 billion directly into the schools. And Don, you in the St. Paul, remember, I'm a St. Paul boy. Many of that went straight to St. Paul, Minneapolis. The formula was so skewed to benefit inner city schools that they got 10 times or more than what a rural school would get on a per pupil basis. It was astronomical. So I'm not sure what the exact percentage was, but the vast majority went into the St. Paul, Minneapolis school district. And when you look at per pupil, it was 10 times or greater per pupil. We're talking thousands of dollars versus a couple $100 in rural schools.
Okay, so let me get this off. So with that said, I like red Twizzlers. Okay, and when I go to Speedway, I buy them. They're like $2.99 for a little tiny pack, and I open them and they're fresh, and I like that licorice, those Twizzlers. They're just delicious. And I say that to kind of not make light of it, but when you're paying for something or something, that you really need, you want it to be right. So it seems like the state has done their due diligence of making sure the school systems have gotten this amount of money that they're new to that. But even the pandemic 2020, 2 years later, it's like we're worse. We have not done any better. And there's the money. Like I said, we don't need any more money. The money is there. But the people that are in charge aren't really doing I like them all. I think they're nice people again, but why keep giving them this money without any tags on it, especially money from the state legislature? It's like
shouldn't outcomes somehow shouldn't outcomes be part of this equation? I mean, shouldn't what their performance and graduation rates and all those things, shouldn't that be part of this equation somehow, rather than just the spreading around of the finances?
I think schools are going to be playing catch up for the next few years. We know that the pandemic had an impact on learning for kids. and especially learning for kids who come from a sort of deficit beginning. And that's going to take a little bit of time. And Anthony, test scores are the easiest way to say people are doing well and people aren't doing well.
Mhm.
In some things that works, and in some things that doesn't work. If you look at my test scores when I was in school, there's no way I would have been able to achieve what I was able to achieve.
Oh, we already know that. No,
So I think they can be a part of the evaluation, but I don't think they should be all of the evaluation. And I think that's where. No, I mean, I'm happy to be here with Senator Cran. I mean, we've had great conversations. There are people in the legislature, there are people in rooms that can have conversations about stuff, not necessarily agreeing on everything, but you're able to have conversations.
Yeah.
And I think that's where progress gets made. It's real easy to just, throw shade one way or the other, say this is the way it is, it's black and white. But I mean, this is all gray stuff. And I mean, Minnesota is actually very fortunate. You talked earlier, Anthony, about the other states doing as great as Minnesota. Actually, Minnesota has one of the most stable budgets in the country. I mean, we flattened the up and downs, and that's a good thing. But yeah, we find ourselves right now with a $17 billion projected surplus. So it's going to be up to people like the senator to be a burr in the saddle of Democrats, because Democrats will now have the majority in the House, majority in the Senate, as well as the governorship. So, Senator Cran mentioned that he's in the minority now, and that's a really, really critical role. I mean, I served in the minority for a few terms, and you have a job not just to sort of check the majority and make sure they're doing what's right, but bring forward your ideas and good ideas, and oftentimes they'll get incorporated.
Ray, I think Ray makes a great point. What no one sees in the media is that we all do have great conversations. It happens all the time, every day, in the hallways, in the retiring room of each of the bodies. But everybody wants to believe it's just like a two-party battle, Republican, Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Ray had as many disagreements with his Senate body within the same party as we did in the House. But that's because it's architected. Our forefathers were amazing to architect that level of discourse at multiple levels. It really does happen. But one, we don't teach civics much anymore. And then two, really the inner workings of how, what you can teach as well, and then to actually participate and experience it. We can tell you that when you serve there, so few people actually come to the Capitol as individual citizens and participate, and even know that Ray was not located in Washington, D.C., nor am I. and that happens all the time. And so then you get to the conversation about how do we make things work. And I can tell you my single most frustrating component is this will be my 40th year working in and around government. And it's priceless serving in this role. And when you talk about school funding, you look at the amount spent on administration now relative to the classroom. Way up in the bodies and the dollars. And tell me, and my argument about government is, convince me we're getting great value. And because at the end of the day, most people couldn't tell you what they collectively pay. You would have no idea. What you pay, you think you don't, most people think you pay too much, only because of a perceived or real value in which they experience and live every day. One of my things has been, and Anthony talked about what about accountability? And I think that's one thing you will see a great lack of across the board. And it's not because of bad people, it's good people. But if you continually get rewarded, meaning keeps receiving a paycheck, regardless of your outcomes or your performance, it's just human nature. You tend to perform at a lower level. Yeah. And I've seen it across the board. And, I've been promoting since I got there. I know we can artificially insert the things that don't naturally occur in government. And it's really about attachment to the job. How the hell do you perform? What do you even know why your job exists? And in the real world, it takes care of itself every day. I don't care at the individual level, the product level, sales level, right? Your competitor decides come in and kick your tail. Even if you're a great company, we don't have any of those things in government because one, you're not going to go anywhere else. But I believe we could do that. I serve on the subcommittee of employee relations, and I'm seen as one of those terrible people because I just won't blindly follow an increase. I'll be the champion if we can insert a training methodology which makes sure everybody's attached to the outcomes of what they do. And that's both in the business process within the agencies and in the industries in which they regulate. Their rules, I would argue today, our rules, which continue to grow every day, are more detrimental than any dollar, the lack of and or surplus of a dollar in what the determination of what you think you're getting from government. And we could build in that training mechanism, and everybody wins. The individual employees win with greater value, the accountability from management levels, all of those things. And I can tell you, I'll be at the front line fighting for compensation packages that kind of reward the greater outcome or greater levels of performance.
Yeah.
But you know who's the key in that? The key is the governor. I can tell you, you can't, or I can't. This is probably the most bipartisan thing the governor does. Is it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. You can't get a meeting with them. And to me, it's most critical. And I had to torpedo the governor at a WCCO interview once to introduce myself because they can't get a meeting with him. And tell them it's like, you need me and I need you. If you truly want more of what you say you want, we can do that together. And all I ask for is an hour of his time, because it truly would take a governor, and hell, it would take multiple governors to change the culture of the business process and have true attachment to why your jobs exist. There's nobody that loses in moving down that training methodology.
No,
and
never.
You can't get a meeting with the guy. So it's about what monies are put on the front line, what actually touches the people who provide the service. In education, it's the teachers. How the heck do we get more resources and make sure all of available resources are there? And I'm telling you, it's the only reason I'm here is really to say, guys, I know we can make a great government that we can trust in and believe in. And then at the end of the day, know that for each program, if we believe we're getting great value, you can justify the budget which is assigned to it, and thus the level of taxation on each citizen. So, but not being able to have even a core meeting, now that's 6 years, and nobody wants to do it. It's just sad.
These things, just as an observer, I mean, these things seem to come down to how do they affect the consumers? I mean, it's like everything you do now. You try to get a doctor's appointment. Oh, we can see you in 4 months. We can see you. You try to go see a dentist. Oh, we've got something 6 months from now. You can get in. I mean, so the effect on the consumer for these type of things, I think, I mean, it's like we make these decisions, but then it's a long process before it catches up with really the needs of the consumers. And that's where the frustration comes in, I think. Even when you're trying to get customer service or what have you with businesses, you have people that sometimes you can't understand them, I can't understand them, if they answer the phone. That's if. They want you to push this button, push that button. Go, we'll send you a text. Well, everybody doesn't text. Everybody doesn't have that. So I think the trickle down thing to the actual people that need and use these services is really somehow it has to be reconnected. I mean, somehow these things have to be reconnected to the consumer and the populace.
Anthony, that's exactly. And what you talked about exists naturally, practically in every facet of your life, except government, because you don't have a choice of which government in which you are represented by. From the operation, right? The staff and what they choose to do, and or where you get to go. I can't go register my car in Wisconsin just because Minnesota's failed to provide a service that is effective. In the rest of the world, you have choices. You'll go elsewhere, you'll shop elsewhere, and you'll exercise that power. Our citizens don't have that choice. And that doesn't mean we can't act or do everything we can to try and accomplish that type of service, especially when it's mandatory, by the way. So
yeah, and I want to. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's good. I'm good now.
Okay, so I want to back up a minute to something that Ray was talking about, former state rep Dean was talking about the testing. I'm not a big fan either, if I'm hearing you correctly, of standardized testing for our kids in school. And I know that shows a result that's abysmal for Minneapolis and St. Paul students. That, you know, with just what's on the Minnesota report card, where you can put in any school anywhere in Minnesota and get a rundown of where they are. Okay. And it's based on the standardized testing. But on the other hand, you do need a gauge to, and I don't look at it as they're doing terrible because of this. I'm just saying that there's no coherence in this current system at all whatsoever to benefit the rest of the kids that did not take the test. So if that's just a sample, to me, those are just samples. If those samples were at 70%, I wouldn't be that concerned. That means that they're growing. But the samples from Pearson for that the state takes for MCA, FAST score, and all these other things, and pumps on their website and demographic information, you know, it's problematic when you know that you're a teacher at a university and you have one Black student out of all your students. You have no Hispanic, Latino students. You have no Asian students. You have, you know, nobody that you've taught before in the public schools in those classrooms, which creates, you know, a really bad situation. So I think that all this money that's going in, there should have been a better outcome. $3 billion, whatever it was, that's enough. One of the things that I think you guys might get upset with this is that I think the teachers in the inner city schools should be paid $100,000 a year from the base after they get their 3 years. I think the tenure system needs to be changed because we're losing a lot of really good teachers. That tenure system, when in 2018, when whoever signed off on it with the tiered licensing system here in Minnesota, you screwed a lot of teachers, yellow, red, black, and white, period. The testing piece. Now, Anthony should be a licensed teacher. Raymond should be a licensed teacher. Senator Coran should be a licensed teacher based on their experience. There should be some supplemental waiver to get you in at tier whatever, so kids can gain and grab and soak in some of that knowledge, but they block you out. And you've heard the push. I'm trying to explain this as quick as I can. You heard a push in Minnesota. We need more Black teachers. We need more Black male teachers. We need more Black, this, Native American, Indian, whatever. It's true. But what no one sees, if you haven't been on the inside of this process, there are roadblocks every 3 classes. There are roadblocks when you get done with that class and go to the state, and someone with a bachelor's degree is looking at your paperwork, deciding where you should end up at. Okay. And it's really messed up. So it trickled down to the kids. The school, public school that I was at is out of control right now. There's fights every day. I have videos I could show you of what I did for the last 6 months at the school that I was basically doing this. Tore up my shoulder because kid was trying to punch another kid behind me and nail me in the shoulder with the combo, 1-2 combo. And you can't do anything. They're not punished. And I'm not saying they should be, but there should be some leadership in the school district. I already know that the superintendent of St. Paul got a new contract, making good money, but they didn't put any caveats on there to make sure there's some outcome for some of that $3 billion or whatever they got there in St. Paul, Minneapolis, too, or St. Paul in this case, to make sure that individual kid is on track for trade school, university, 2-year college, or Ivy League school. So Minnesota in that area and those zip codes are not producing folks that want to, with a vision, you know, on the broad scale. So getting back to my original point, yeah, that testing thing, I'm not too thrilled about it either, Raymond, at all whatsoever. But I use that now less as a Bible and more as a gauge, because if I see things click up, I know that area is getting addressed.
Hey, Don.
Yes.
Don, along that line of, you know, the testing, I think, Ray, you and I probably could run a parallel path. I barely made it through high school and have no college under my belt. Life skills matter. And 4-year degrees are not for everybody. In fact, college isn't for everybody. And so we need to make sure and turn it around. But I think if you recall, I think the degradation. There's a whole bunch of issues outside of just the funding, but when you get rid of graduation standards, which I think they did in 2013, is when Minnesota eliminated the grad standards. So yeah, the standardized tests are limiting, but you have to have a measure to be able to, some type of gauge to measure performance. So I measured that down. I don't know if you and I talked about it, but I tour, I go out everywhere I can. I want to be in the classroom. I want to be everywhere. I don't care where it is. Mm-hmm. It's the greatest thing you get to do in these roles is to see and to go to the front lines and see how things are done. But so I was up in Rush City Prison. It's in my district. And so my question was, I'm meeting with the education folks up there, and I think they were talking, whatever, we'll get to the education. So I asked, I wanted to know how many people have a GED or high school diploma in Rush City. Now, Rush City, just so you guys know, is one of the prisons that's actually full. Most of the rest are barely half full. But they're full because they get all the reoffenders. And so I asked, I said, tell me what percentage of people come in there with a GED or a high school diploma? Don, you have any idea?
No, I don't. Not at all.
What do you think it'd be? Shoot it out.
40.
Rashad. I see Rashad said 15%. Rashad and I think a lot alike. So right. What do you think? 15, 20%?
I think about maybe 25%.
Yep. So the guy that leads their education says 80% of their population has a GED or high school diploma. And so what that means is we're issuing pieces of paper that mean nothing. When you talk about consequences and just moving people through the process, they're in their context was in the prison. There's where do we start them with the education program, right? Second grade, third, whatever their classroom is. And so literally they were just having a conversation that week at the prison about, that just knowing that they have a GED or diploma means nothing to them. And so now they're looking at and doing assessments. They're trying to do an assessment to make sure that while everybody's there, they're doing everything they can to get them the greatest level of education. That was shocking to me from the perspective of, your bias and your base assumptions of those that have no education. High school diploma has typically, even that would lead you out of poverty. Not in this case, when I think we've reduced the standards as much as that we're issuing diplomas that people are functionally illiterate. And when you have no standards and whatever that balance of standards is, I think that's what shows. So if we want to talk about pipeline to prison, I think our current education process is an expressway or a freeway unless we apply standards and do something drastically different than what we are doing today, because it's not working.
What happened to the push? The push in 2015 to 2008 to 2012 was, stopping this pipeline to prison. I watched some people that I respected or didn't respect, I cannot confirm or deny, that would get up on these podiums and say, hey, we have to stop this pipeline to prison. I watched academics that had all their research was the pipeline to prison thing, from schools to the prison. And I haven't seen that turn. There's a lady named Karen Chenoweth. She writes all these educational leadership books that I've been forced to read, and then some that I just wanted to read because she's very interesting. And one of the things she said is that out of all the thousands of school districts that she's been in across the United States and overseas, that she has never saw the needle move up unless there was talented leadership, period. And if you look at like the school, I'm looking, for some equity, and not to make light of this, but this is my version of equity. Okay. I gotta superimpose myself in there, but there's not a lot of that going on. And it feels bad knowing that, I have a 9 and 11-year-old, and the amount of work that my wife and I, more her, that we have to do to keep our kids reading that we really shouldn't have to do. I mean, we should be involved, but not 100% Monday through Thursday when we've worked all day and we've got at home, and we know how little Black boys are perceived, right? We know in the state of Minnesota, we know that they could fall off that edge, don't matter if they're my kids or anybody else's kids, and something terrible happens that they might cause from the lack of not knowing, life skills, ethical concerns, interpersonal communication, all this stuff. So we have to tell them what to do, how to talk to people, and as every parent does. But when you send them to school, I don't expect them to get all this 100%. I expect them to get maybe 20% and then come on home, because you just can't learn in the school. And they're barely getting that. And they go to two of the best schools in St. Paul Public Schools. And so it's very stressful. And we need to fix that, because if it's happening to us, it's happening to hundreds and thousands of other parents across the state of Minnesota. And this current system, MDE, Statute 128.03, the mission of education is to work with the parents and guardians of these students to make sure they become, lifelong learners. And I used to have that somewhere, and but I don't know. I think I might have deleted it off. But go ahead.
I mean, you're raising a really important part. Education is. Mm-hmm. Schools are partially responsible for that. As we were talking earlier about test scores and things, I began to think about the adverse childhood experiences and how that impacts the learning of some kids and all of that. And I think that in some communities, there's an expectation that we'll send our kids out the door in the morning and you will give them what they need to become good citizens. And I, as a parent or a family or a community, don't have that responsibility. That falls on the schools. Well, it can't be that. I mean, schools are part of the community. Schools are part of the family. They're not a panacea to take care of everything. And I think that sometimes our expectations for schools is pretty high on what they can actually do.
But I mean, don't they have to do? I understand the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic. They got to have that. But where does interest and aptitude come in? Things that the young people are interested in, that they have aptitude. Are these things kind of being explored with students? I worked at a program years ago at Control Data where we recruited students from around the country at Job Corps centers. And these students at these Job Corps centers, I mean, these were inner cities all over the states, everywhere. But those Job Corps centers consisted of kids that for whatever reason, they were not successful in public schools. For whatever reason, they may have had some legal type things and they ended up in a Job Corps center. And so we would go there and we would give them the Control Data Institute entrance test. And if they could pass it, we would bring them to Minneapolis and they could get a scholarship to go to the Institute and learn computer programming, computer operations. But the big thing with that is once these kids were able to pass that test, it did a lot to them. What did that do, say, to their families? They say, wow, I passed this test and I'm going to be going to Minneapolis to learn computer operations, And that was based strictly on their interest and aptitude. And they were guided from there to do the work. And when there was 100 students, 94 of them graduated. And most of them went back to work at facilities in their home state. And a lot of them stayed up here in the Twin Cities. So those kind of creative things with schools, I think that these are things now in today's world, looking at the way things are today, it should be more emphasis on that, the interest things that the kids have, and expound on that.
Yeah, you're right, Anthony. And what that construct is called right now in the public school system is called pathways. I've seen a couple of good pathway programs that actually work in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, actually, and I can't deny it. I'm just going to tell you the truth. And the Pathways program is part of the concurrent enrollment, the PSEO, the College in the Schools for the University of Minnesota, College Now from Southwest. MnSCU has a huge system of concurrent enrollment stuff that they'll qualify or certify teachers like me to do this stuff if they have 18 graduate credits in a particular discipline. The problem is, or the challenge, I don't like using the word problem. The challenge is that the districts, some of them have not set up the pathway program from 6 to 12. So what happens is, okay, you're going to take Mr. Allen's class in 11th grade for public speaking. That's going to give you 3 credits from Mankato. You're going to take Mr. Allen's teaching class, Introduction to Teaching. That's going to give you 4 credits to Southwest University, from Southwest University in Marshall, that you can use anywhere. You're going to take this nursing program. It's going to get you licensed to be a CNA or whatever. And that's usually successful in those programs around St. Paul and Minneapolis. What they haven't done is sat down and put a point person like the superintendent or appointee of the superintendent to actually build that program. So in St. Paul and Minneapolis and any rural area or surrounding suburb that wanted to do it, that kid on graduation day would not only have a boatload of credits, like 16 to 18 credits, they'd have an associate's degree. So their college career, academic career, would be 2 years max, maybe 3 years in some cases, but 2 years, because they have this associate's degree from accredited universities around the state of Minnesota, public and private, who supported that curriculum and certified it at a certain level at college standard. So until they do that, it's going to be a one-hit wonder. You know, I had kids graduate that I taught in high school, and they had 8 credits. And I said, are you going to college? Are you going to MnSCU? Are you going to Southwest, which is a diamond in the rough for inner city kids that no one's talking about in Marshall, Minnesota? They'll invite you down for 5 weeks. And in the summer you live in the dorms, and if you go to these rudimentary English, science, and math classes and you pass with a C, you're automatically enrolled in Southwest. You automatically have a dorm room with your cohorts there, everybody that you were down there with, and you go and you become a teacher, your education major. And we can't seem to connect with the public school systems. They want to be bigger than the universities, and the universities are saying, come on, we'll do this, we'll work with you. Even Hamlin, a private school, they would love to do something like that, you know, and we have those kids with that acumen. So until we fix that, and again, there's not that many talented folks in the districts locally here that could even think about writing that and pulling it off. And I'm sorry, I'm not disrespecting because you're nice people, but you can't write it. And if you can't write it, you can't vision it, you can't see the working parts, you can't do it, period. I'm sorry, I'm off my soapbox.
Don, but Don,
getting down. Go ahead.
Don,
Go
I
ahead.
think that when you looked at all of the things Ray brought up earlier about the community, you know, and how do we build the community? And again, you can't get more teachers of color if you can't get them through high school. And then to show them and get them excited, and nobody wants to talk about the root cause of any of this. I think Rashad put it out there. Too many poverty pimps and nonprofits that haven't delivered except for to themselves. And we're surrounded with dollars in every community. It's what do we get? And to me, I still think that it should be required viewing for every legislator, everybody in this, of the documentary they did for over that Lucy Laney, the Love Them First documentary. That thing should be everywhere, because what it showed is there are solutions. And by the way, I'd trade 10 licensed positions at one of those schools for 10 people who give a crap about the community and the kids. We have enough resources to wrap around and surround them, but you got to find one person who cares, and then we can guide them through the process. And to me, that was the most telling. Yeah. My shock is that didn't get more coverage than it did, because it really is the foundational aspect. And Maury convinced, right, the principal at the time, Maury convinced all of their staff to go out and go door knocking during the summer, try to find somebody who cares, right? That first off, the parents, right? But anybody in that network to wrap around that child, that they're prepared to do the things that are needed from school, or to prepare them for learning at school. And to me, that's the model. The community, if it doesn't start there and we can't figure out a way to break into and break that cycle, because only somebody from that community is going to be able to hold those who live in the community accountable. And I don't care what community it is, but we keep talking about all of the poor outcomes of this failed system. And again, you go back to Rashad's out there in the chat line. I can't chat back with them, but those people and make sure that they can come in and to take care of them, because what today we have is far more profitable with the nonprofits and everybody out there to live off the symptoms of these failed systems than it is to fix them and actually improve or change the statistical outcomes that we see today. Nobody wants to do something drastically different. So,
yeah. Raymond Dean, final words, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great to be on the show today. We
Yeah.
started talking about budget, and of course, we ended up on education because it's such a
Again.
critical thing for all of our kids. You think that Mr. Don Allen has a sort of passion for education and kids because the show always seems to loop back to that. But, you know, I mean, watch what the legislature does. Call your
Yeah.
legislators and say, hey, you know, this is important. This is critical to me. And, you know, I plan on being at the Capitol a couple times this session to talk about an issue that's critical to me with legislators. So hopefully I'll get a chance to stop by your office, Senator.
that'd be wonderful.
Well, hey, Anthony, again, I appreciate you being here. Senator Mark
Always.
Moran, Dean, hey, it's really good that you guys could come in and hang out and chat with us. And yeah, it always does go back in educate to education, because I found out some things this year and last year that I didn't know that were happening, and I would never splurt it out publicly because it's for me as a learning experience and how to fix stuff by some really talented leaders. And I'm saving it. I'm kind of what they call sandbagging. If you're in sales, you know, you can sandbag a little bit and then push your numbers up when I sold 6 more cars I didn't tell you about. And, you know, and it's very interesting because all these problems or challenges that are happening now, they can be fixed in under 24 months. And it's radical. It's emergency surgery. But should we risk putting out another group of kids in the Twin Cities that have been doing the stuff that's been going on and let their families suffer too? You know, I drove through North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis and St. Paul, and I just saw some things that with all this money on the table shouldn't be there. With that said, thanks for watching. Appreciate it. And you've been watching Our Black News, of course, and we're out of here. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
All right.
And
Thank you.
Steve.